Look, I'm absolutely delighted to be here this morning to talk about what I've called Disability Leadership Musings from Abroad. And I was absolutely delighted to be invited to give a presentation at the Adult Autism Health and Wellbeing Conference in Perth in Scotland. And this conference was a conference with a difference. Scotland reminded me very, very much of New Zealand. It has a similar demographic. It has rural areas, it has urban areas. It has a strong commitment to social justice, the importance of education and a holistic view on what education was and is. These three words that are being bandied about a lot in the disability sector: local area coordination. What's interesting about their local area coordination is that they focused first on people with intellectual impairment and autism. And that's really, really interesting in terms of, and that's why there's a lot of placement in the Scottish Consortium on Learning Disability. Now, I also have to say that Scotland's given as an example in New Zealand's work on better public services. So Scotland has a lot of resonances for New Zealand, and I certainly picked up a lot in the 2 weeks that I was there. Disability leadership, I saw many examples of disability leadership on both a micro and macro level when I was in Scotland. And in terms of the macro level, the conference and the organisation of the conference was excellent and magnificent in my view. And what I really liked about the organisation of this conference was that people with autism themselves decided what the topics were that they wanted to explore, what were issues that were important to them and the issues that they cared about, and they tied it in to the strategy. So there was a really clear definition and purpose around why we were doing this work. The topics were interesting, I thought. Dealing with officialdom, which was my personal favourite, and it was really interesting. And being quite serious, and some officials up the front here particularly are laughing at that. I said to people, actually, you know something? You realise that actually, in terms of the roadblocks, this doesn't have to be as much of a roadblock as you think. Because sometimes officials can be right, and you can engage well with them. Sometimes they can be wrong. And I think for some members of the ASPE Forum, from their experiences, that was very revelatory, that actually officials could be wrong. I said, well, actually, in my experience, officials are human beings, and, it's about the dialogues that you have with those people and the way in which you work with those people that is going to be important. The other topic which I thought was really interesting was getting the best start in life. This ASPE Forum of adults on the spectrum were really, really clear that in order for the strategy to work and work well, there had to be an acknowledgement of a generation that was coming through. And some practical leadership things came from the conference, which I think is great. The ASPE Forum are now meeting weekly because they want to write papers to inform the strategy development and to tell their own stories. I was fortunate enough to meet both the Deputy First Minister and the Minister of Public Health during my visit. It was really interesting. I mean, Nicola was great, and it was really interesting to meet with her, but also to encourage members of the ASPE Forum to say, actually, these are politicians who are interested in this issue. And they're interested and they care, and you can talk to them. But what was interesting was that forum members knew that they wanted to take leadership, but they weren't quite sure how. And the conference was really important because it gave people confidence to say, actually we can. I met a remarkable man named David Seagrave. He was the oldest member by a country mile of the Aspie Forum. He was first diagnosed with ASD at 64. Up until that point, he was just seen as strange, weird, bizarre, whatever pejoratives you want to throw out. His diagnosis has actually been a validation. Becoming disabled was the best thing that had ever happened to him. And one of the things that was really nice, was somewhat challenging, but what was really nice was to sit down with David and say, you know something, sir, you can take a leadership role here. You can be the elder statesman of all these young people who, don't know what they're about, including me, because we haven't lived the life that you have lived. And I think for him, that was a really important step, because he could see himself as a leader having, for the vast majority of his life, been told you couldn't lead. So for me, that was really, really important. Tricky reflections. Are we ensuring that we get the best out of the rich potential that's in our community? And the disability community is incredibly wide and incredibly rich in my view. Here's a tricky one though, for New Zealand disabled leaders. Would we welcome and celebrate David and give him opportunities to lead? And can we be quite innovative about how we invite people to lead? Because for David, his special field of interest was the Scottish Highlands. So if there's a Scottish Highlands Walking Commission, I don't know. Maybe he could be a good member. And would we give him the chance to be a good member? Although I have put up, can it please not just be governance? Because we do that a lot in the disability leadership. We put you on this governance group, whether it's education, whether it's health, and it's like, well, actually, and what we do also, discomfort factor, is that we actually pick a few people because we like them and they're safe. And I'm not sure about that. So I thought about that in relationship to New Zealand. Sophie Pascoe and David Seagrave are about as different as you could possibly imagine. Sophie is 19, she's a Paralympian, she has been described by Westpac, now that's got to be a validation, she has been described by Westpac as one of New Zealand's most successful sportswomen at 19, right? David, 72, so different ends of the age scale. They do have a thing in common. They see impairment positively. Sophie says that impairment, disability was the best thing that ever happened to her because she gets to go to Beijing, she gets to go to London. Why don't I see Sophie at the events I attend? Now, it may be that we just work in two different spheres of humanity, which is absolutely fine. But surely here is someone who is a disabled leader. I think there's surely a space where she can lead. But do we, in our government structures, open that up for her? And how do we do that in an authentic way? We do have policy frameworks that allow, and say they allow, Sophie and David to lead. We've got NZDS, UN Convention, Disability Action Plan, and the joined up nature of that planning is good. And that was one thing that I kind of sensed in Scotland, was that there were some parts of the planning process that were kind of missed out. So for example, the UN Convention was kind of a bit of a revelation to some people in Scotland. It was kind of, oh my gosh, right. And admittedly, this was at the Perth conference, you know, so this was the Scottish Consortium on Learning Disability, but it was like, when I mentioned it, it was like, oh, actually, yeah, we're still part of the UK, so we can actually use this. Scotland's reinforced for me that we need to be generous around how we see leadership in this space. Leadership is action, and it's challenging people's and your own perceptions of yourself. So that can happen in lots and lots of different ways. And I suppose my invitation from Scotland is to think innovatively and differently about how we can include people right across this incredibly diverse, amazing community, which is our community. What could this mean? We might need to be open to lots of different styles of leadership. Matt might love sitting around a table at new model reference groups. David might have a contribution to make in Scotland Highland preservation. Sophie might love to organise swim meets. And all those forms of leadership are valuable, and they need space to grow and flourish. And that can be a government response, it can be a community response, it can be lots and lots of different ways of responding.